Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. Great River Energy is a not-for-profit generation and transmission cooperative. We're a not-for-profit cooperative, and Lake Country Power is one of our members. I'm also a member of Lake Country Power. My wife and I own a cabin in the Jacobson area, so it's a pleasure to be here both as a representative of Great River Energy and as a member. As was mentioned earlier, Great River Energy has 28 members. I was holding this upside down, so it was trying to go backwards, and I just had to turn it right side up. We have 28 members. Lake Country Power is one of them. We have 665,000 retail accounts that are served by our 28 members, or 1.7 million people who live in the homes that we serve. We're the fourth largest generation and transmission cooperative in the nation. We've got 938 employees, 3,700 megawatts, 3,718 megawatts of generation, of which 710 megawatts are renewable. To give you an idea what a megawatt is, the average home uses 5 to 10 kilowatts on peak, and there's 1,000 kilowatts in a megawatt. And we have 4,771 miles of transmission lines. Here's our 10-year rate forecast. We're projecting an average rate increase annually of 1.56% per year, and that's less than the expected rate of inflation. We completed 20 solar installations last year. One is right outside of Lake Country Power's office in Grand Rapids. You can see it right on Highway 2 when you drive by there. Solar works in Minnesota. I'm talking about solar voltaic. It does work here, but it doesn't work as well as it does in Arizona. You can see on this table here what the capacity factors are. And you would have a capacity factor of 100% if your power plant was online every hour of every day of the year. And of course, that's not going to be true for solar because solar only works during the day. The average in Minnesota for the first year of our solar installations operation, the average capacity factor was 13.8%. The low point, as you might expect, was in December at 3.8%, and high was in July at 18.4%. In the church that my wife and I attend on Sunday, someone was circulating a petition asking the local power company to be 100% renewable, and I didn't sign the petition. I wanted to say to the guy who was circulating it, well, which 13.8% of the time do you want to have power? But I was in church, so I didn't say that. And even wind power has a capacity factor of 30 to 35%, and so that's where we come in. We have a lot of wind power, we have a little bit of solar, we have a lot of other power plants on our system too, so that you've got reliable power supply around the clock. Here's kind of typical solar performance. You'd like your solar system to operate the nice bell-shaped curve that's on the left there, and that's what it does on days when it's sunny all day. And then that's what we call ideal output, and then there's partially ideal output, and I show a curve here in the middle where it's partly cloudy in the morning and sunny in the afternoon, and then there's erratic output where it's partly cloudy all day. And you can see what that looks like. That's not very good. Well, what we found in our first year of operation was that in June, July, and August, which is when we need the power the most to run air conditioners, especially in southern Minnesota and the Twin Cities area, we got ideal output 0% of the time. And in fact, just 10% of the time for the whole year we get ideal output. And we got that erratic output 70% of the time. So I like solar, but it's only going to be a supplemental thing. We need other forms of power supply to give us reliable year-round power. Now I'll spend some time on the Clean Power Plan, which is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's rule that would reduce carbon dioxide or CO2 emissions from large power plants to reduce global warming. Or global climate change, if you prefer. Here's some background on how the rule came about. In a series of legal challenges, the Supreme Court held that greenhouse gases are a pollutant under the Clean Air Act. That was in a ruling called Massachusetts versus EPA in 2007. What that meant is that EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, must regulate carbon dioxide if it endangers public health and welfare. And EPA did make that endangerment finding, and that endangerment finding was upheld in June of 2014. So the EPA issued its final Clean Power Plan rule and published it on October 23, 2015. Our power plants in Minnesota do not emit enough CO2 to be governed by the rule, but we have 3 coal-fired power plants in North Dakota that are governed by the rule, and the state of North Dakota has a choice under the rule of establishing either a mass goal or a rate goal. And what mass means is that the goal is stated in tons of CO2 emitted per year. And if they choose the mass goal, they would have to reduce carbon dioxide emissions in North Dakota, and so would we, by 37% by 2030. And under the rate goal, the reduction would have to be 45% by 2030. So I prefer the mass goal. The EPA provided several mechanisms to meet state goals. I'm not going to read the whole list to you there. The most important one is the last one on the list, trading of allowances or credits as established by the rule. And what the rule does is it allows electric utilities like Great River Energy to trade allowances. We're allowed to emit so much CO2. We can trade those allowances with other utilities. And that'll end up being the best way to comply with the rule, in my opinion. There have been many opinions on what the Clean Power Plan is going to cost. The EPA said it will save the average consumer $85 a year. They made that conclusion by assuming there'd be a lot of energy conservation as a result of the rule. And we already have a lot of energy conservation in Minnesota. We've had energy conservation programs here for decades that a lot of states don't have. So I don't expect there to be any savings as a result of the rule. We already know how to conserve energy here. NRECA, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, said there would be disproportionate, devastating impact on rural electric consumers and rural economies. And the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity said it would cost our economy $292 billion, or about a 20% increase in electric bills by 2030. Now that coalition, they really don't like the Clean Power Plan, so that's probably the high end, a 20% increase. But that's too high. I hope it's much lower than that. We really don't know yet. An official of a power pool in the East called PJM said you can get almost any number you want by changing the assumptions to fit. So we need to do some more study of that. There was a huge lawsuit filed once the rule was published. It's called West Virginia et al. Versus EPA. There's over 160 plaintiffs, over 90 law firms, legal departments, and state attorneys general. There's a lot of lawyers who are involved in this and are very happy because of this rule. GRE is not a plaintiff. Our point of view is that once a government agency issues a rule, it's no longer a political issue, it's a business issue. And we're treating it as a business issue. And I'm glad we're not a plaintiff because that lawsuit has gotten very politicized. The case is now before the U.S. Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia. They're having oral arguments June 2nd. They'll make a decision later this year or early next year, and then about a year after that, the U.S. Supreme Court will decide. The main issues are, does the Clean Power Plan exceed the legislative authority granted to the EPA? And has the EPA usurped state authority under the Clean Air Act? I tried to come up with another word other than usurped. That's kind of a lawyer's word, but my thesaurus didn't give me any good alternatives. So anyway, that's the issue. Does the EPA usurp state authority there? On February 9th, 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court stayed the Clean Power Plan, which means the rule can't be enforced and all the deadlines are suspended. This is literally unique. The Supreme Court had never done that before. They had never stayed a rule that a lower court, the Court of Appeals, had declined to stay. The vote in favor of the stay was 5-4, so it passed by just one vote. And then 5 days later, Justice Antonin Scalia died. He was one of the 5 who voted in favor of the stay. And if ever there was a lesson about procrastination, this is it. If the parties had waited even a week to file their request for a stay, they might not have gotten it. It might have failed on a 4-4 vote. So the case is almost certainly going to be taken up by the Supreme Court. It only takes 4 votes to do that. And really what happens is going to depend a lot on whether they hear the case before a successor is confirmed or not. If there's a 4-4 tie, then the appeal will fail. And if a successor is confirmed and it's after the election, it's really going to depend a lot on who gets elected president. So I'd encourage everyone to go out and vote in November. My conclusion is that carbon dioxide will be regulated, but we don't know how. The Clean Power Plan may be completely upheld. It could be completely overturned, or it could be sent back to a lower court or EPA on narrow grounds. And even if it's upheld, the implementation process and challenges will take years. Our only certainty is that CO2 emissions from power plants will be regulated eventually. And finally, Mr. President, I'd like to present a check to you from Great River Energy to be contributed to Operation Roundup. So thank you very much, and here's a donation from GRE to Operation Roundup.
All right.
Thank you very much. $1,000.